Let me begin by saying that I find this whole process to be unreal. I mean, this sort of ordeal you're being put through to account for all these words, in particular, given some of the groups that are ratcheting all this up. This group J Street that, for example, a few years ago invited the chief Palestinian negotiator, Erekat, to address their conference, a person who has justified the murder of Jews and as self-defense, is a person they invited to speak at their conference. This is a group who has routinely attacked people who hold my views with content that I find to be a smear and, quite frankly, a mischaracterization of our positions. The second thing I think you're confronting, not in this hearing per se, but writ large, is what I believe is this sort of existent orthodoxy among many of the people in the State Department and among the so-called smart people in American foreign policy that somehow the United States needs to be a fair and balanced arbiter in this situation that we're facing in the Middle East. I don't understand that view. I really don't. First of all, my view is that Israel's our strongest ally in the region. My view is that in addition to a moral obligation that we have to protect the right of the Jewish people to a homeland, especially one founded in the aftermath of the Holocaust, they also happen to be the only pro-American, free enterprise democracy in the region. That alone is reason enough to be strongly aligned to them. The second point I would make is, and I find it startling, is all these so-called professionals in the State Department and, again, among the foreign policy elite are out there all the time. I very rarely hear them stand up and speak vociferously on the sorts of activities that are being conducted by some in the Palestinian leadership. Yet they are never, never reluctant to step forward and lead the efforts to condemn Israel time and again. And this is what you're going to confront when you are confirmed in terms of some in the State Department. There's also this misconception that continues to be spread around in the letters and all this old dialogue that's around this, that you somehow have issued a wholesale rejection of the so-called two-state solution. I think you've already testified here today, and you have said before, and others have said as well, that in a perfect and ideal world, you would have two independent states, a Jewish state and a Palestinian state, peacefully side by side living with one another. The problem is there are significant impediments to that, perhaps the least of which is the existence of Jewish settlements in Judea and Samaria. For example, I would say that one of the biggest obstacles to that would be efforts by the previous administration to pressure Israel and to impose upon them a negotiated settlement outside the bounds of what the Jewish people in Israel support and what is in the interest of the nation of Israel. I would say a bigger impediment is the unwillingness of the leadership of the Palestinian Authority to recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. And that is the key phrase, not just Israel's right to exist, but as the homeland for the Jewish people. That is a big impediment to a deal. Because how are you going to negotiate a peaceful coexistence with a neighbor who does not recognize your right to exist? What are you negotiating? The terms of your destruction? I think that's a much bigger impediment. Or how about the wholesale, systematic indoctrination of young Palestinians into a doctrine of hatred and the justification for the killing and the murdering of Jews that begins sadly, tragically, and outrageously at a very young age? I think that's a pretty big impediment. You know what else is a big impediment? These international efforts to impose on Israel a negotiated solution along the terms that other countries think are appropriate. I think that's a bigger impediment. You know what is a bigger impediment? The incitement to violence by leaders of the Palestinian Authority. And that isn't widely reported because often that doesn't make it into their English press releases. But when they go around justifying these attacks, when they dedicate monuments to so-called martyrs who are nothing but terrorists, when they spread ridiculous rumors about what the Israeli government's going to do on the Temple Mount or with the Dome of the Rock, these things that incite violence. And so I view these things as bigger impediments than all the other things. And I think it's accurate to say that your position is not that you are opposed to this ideal outcome in which there would be two states, but that you recognize that at this moment, given the circumstances that exist in the world today and in that region in particular, it is not likely to have that outcome. And hopefully that will change. Hopefully the Palestinians will have better leadership. Hopefully they'll be more prosperous. Hopefully they'll have an opportunity to grow their economy and their security. And maybe in 20 years, 15 years, 5 years, sooner rather than later, we all hope there will be the opportunity for this to occur. But right now, those conditions are perhaps not in place. And the worst thing we can try to do is to go in there and impose on our most loyal and important ally in the region a deal that is bad for their security and bad for their future. Is that an accurate characterization of your feelings with regards to the two-state solution?
I think it is, Senator.
Let me just say, Mr. Chairman, I do want to enter into the record a letter from the Union of Orthodox Jewish Congregations of America.
Without objection.
One last point that as an ambassador, at the end of the day, your role will be to represent, advocate for, and implement the policy of the president. Is that correct?
100% correct.
And so on any issue, whether it's the location of the embassy, whether it's our position on any given matter, it is your job ultimately to be an advocate for the decisions made from the Oval Office and by this administration, not your personal views.
Certainly. I will be an advocate for the president in the same way that I would be an advocate for a client. My personal views are completely subordinated to the views of the president and the Secretary of State.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.